welcome everyone here tonight. We're going to be studying about the table of showbread, or the table of the presence, and we'll begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in Torah. All right, now tonight we are going to be studying about the second piece of furniture in the tabernacle. Last week we talked about the Ark of the Covenant, and so this week we will just continue on in the verses in Exodus 25 and 33, 25-23, with the table of showbread. Okay, and there, for those that are calling in on the telephone and don't have this stuff with them, the PowerPoint here, I'll go ahead and read it. You will make a table of acacia wood 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits. You are to overlay it with pure gold and make a crown of gold around it. Make a border of a single hand width wide around it, and a golden crown for the border all around. Also make 4 gold rings for it. Put the rings in the 4 corners that are on its 4 feet. The rings are to be close to the borders as holders for the poles to carry the table. You are to make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold so that the table may be carried with them. You are also to make the dishes, pans, jars, and bowls to pour drink offerings from pure gold. Also set the bread of the presence on the table before me. Okay, now the table of showbread, or the table of the presence, it was made of, we saw there, it was made of wood. And I'll tell you what I did. I got some pictures here that show in relationship where the table of showbread would have been in the holy place. Now this is a cutaway. I'm using the Rose guide to the tabernacle here, and it's a cutaway showing the showbread over on the right-hand side, or it would be the north side of the holy place, because as we learned before, that the tabernacle was always oriented to be running east and west, and so that the entrance would have been to the east. All right, so we see that the table of showbread then is on the north side, and here's another photo or picture of where that would be, just to kind of give you a little bit different view of that. Now, I do have, took some, there were several representations of the showbread, and this one is one, and it's kind of bogus because it's got matzah in the middle of it, and I'll be talking about that in just a minute as to what was actually on the table. And there's another representation, and these things, they make them very, very fancy, and I don't know how fancy they were. This one is this looks like that it was developed sometime in the Baroque period of art. So and here's another one that's a little simpler, but it does have the crown around it and the gold, and then here's another one. Again, they've got these little bowls with looks like tortillas underneath them for the bread. But as we'll learn here in a minute, it was not something that it wasn't like today's matzah, and certainly wasn't it wasn't these little cracker things here that they're showing. So finally, let's go into the construction of it. It was made of acacia wood, and That's the same wood that we saw that was used in the construction of the Ark of the Covenant. And like the Ark of the Covenant, it was covered in gold, and the table also had 4 rings on it all the way around it, so that they could stick the 2 poles in it, and it was carried pretty much just like the Ark of the Covenant was. Now, it had 2 rims or 2 crowns on it, which was different than the Ark of the Covenant, and that has been suggested that because this was a kind of a foreshadowing of the Messiah, that Yeshua he was the King of Kings, King of everything, and he was also the King of the Jews. So that was one author's take on why there were 2 crowns on there. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us why there were 2 crowns. It just said that there would be 2 of them in there. And this was like the Ark of the Covenant. It was fitted with 2 poles. And now, unlike the Ark of the Covenant, the Bible God didn't tell them to leave the poles in there. So maybe they could have pulled the poles out and stored them away someplace, and then come back and put the poles back in when they were ready to carry. We don't know. I know that the Bible didn't say that, okay, the poles are supposed to stay in there in the rings like it did with the Ark of the Covenant. It definitely stated with the Ark of the Covenant that you put the poles in there and you leave them in there. So that was a little bit of a difference, but we do see that the poles are there just like with the Ark of the Covenant. The wood was there. The thing was made out of wood and then overlaid with gold, just like the Ark of the Covenant was. And so that's the similarities of the Ark and the table of showbread. Also, I think it's in my notes later on, but I'll just mention it here because I'm thinking about it, is that they were the same height, 27 inches high. And so I'll comment on that in just a minute. But this one, it was 36 inches long and 18 inches wide or deep, and then 27 inches high. So it was a little bit smaller than the Ark of the Covenant, but it was. I didn't go and look out to see whether these were built to the golden proportions or whatever that thing is called, but I'm sure that just looking at the size of it and the dimensions, it would have been an attractive table, something that I've built tables before and things that 36 inches long, 18 inches deep, and then 27 inches high. It's pretty good proportions for a table. Nowadays we would make a table 30 inches high, but still it would have been very attractive proportions, as it were. So now let's look at. I want to see just for a second though the back to the construction of this in verse 23, and we'll look at verse 23 there. It said you'll make a table of acacia wood. Now the idea of the table, this word table, this is the first time that you see the word table in the Bible, and the Hebrew word for that is it's shulchan, and the word shulchan implies it's like a table that is spread for a meal. Sometimes we will come to say a party or a banquet and said, boy, they had a great spread. we use that word. Well, this is the same kind of connotation for this word shulchan, that is a table that's spread for a meal. And of course, this table, it had the 12 loaves of bread, and we have God who is dwelling in the Holy of Holies. That was his dwelling place there, and that's where the mercy seat, and that's where his voice was. That when he would speak to Moses would go into the Holy of Holies and speak directly to the Lord. That's where his presence was. And then the table that was set in the holy place would signify a meal or fellowship with God. So we know that God does desire to draw close to us and to have fellowship with us, with his people, because he gives instructions regarding the Moedim, the appointed times, the feasts, or whatever you want to call them. They are God's appointed times, God's feasts. They are not the Jewish feasts. All right, it's a common thing that people come up and talk about, and they say that, well, these are the Jewish feasts. No, they're God's feasts that he ordained, he instituted, and basically he's just inviting us to come and fellowship with him. So I did show that, that I talked about the two, the showbread, the table of showbread and the Ark of the Covenant were both 27 inches high. And so it was kind of interesting that you'd see that God's mercy seat was at the same level as his fellowship table. And so does that mean that God's mercy is equal to his fellowship with us? And I think, if we have right standing before him, Yeshua said that we can call him Abba, Father. So, yes, I would say that, God's mercy and his fellowship are kind of on equal footing with us. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting. It doesn't really specify anything like that in the Bible, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting take on it, that both of them were the same height. And now I'm sounding like some of the authors that I'm reading, trying to come up with interesting things to say. But anyway, let's go ahead. What about the bread? Now, I had fun with this today, doing some calculations about the bread. In Leviticus 24:5-6, it says, also you're to take fine flour and bake 12 cakes of it, with 2/10 of an ephah in each cake, an ephah or a deal in some translations. Then you are to set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the pure gold table before Adonai. Now, I looked at this, and the word cakes here, and where it says you're to bake 12 cakes. I looked in several translations, and all of them said cakes when it was translated into English. But then when you go into Hebrew, the word for cakes here, you bake 12 cakes, the word is challah. And of course, challah is the bread that we are familiar with, that we bake on Fridays for our Shabbat meal. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing, that they would use the word challah. Now, this 2/10 of a deal or 2/10 of an ephah, that equals 2/10 equals a gallon of flour. Okay, 1 gallon. Now, a gallon of flour is roughly about 7 to 7.5 pounds, something like that. If you were to take a gallon of flour, pour it into a gallon bucket, and we don't normally measure flour by gallons, but as a comparison, I asked Pat. I said, "Okay, Pat is my wife, for all of those that don't know us." I asked her, "Okay, now when you make challah on Fridays, how much flour do you use to make the 2 loaves? And so she said, well, it's about 8 cups of flour, and plus or minus, because you put it out and you knead the bread and all that kind of stuff. And so that 8 cups, that comes out to be about a half a gallon. All right. And so when she's making the stuff up, there's many of you have eaten the challah that she makes, and it is yummy. For all of those of you in the other countries that never get a chance to sample the challah that Pat makes, it is wonderful. But when she makes it, she's got these little loaf carrying baskets that basically she makes them to fit that loaf carrying basket. Makes it easier to transport in the synagogue, and then when we go to Oneg. So she uses about 4 cups, about a half a gallon, and that makes 2 loaves. Okay, 2 loaves, and each one of these loaves is about when they're all they've risen. Of course, they got yeast in them and everything, and when they're risen and she bakes them, they come out to be about 18 inches long by 6 inches wide, and they're about 2, maybe 3 inches tall. Okay, I just for the purposes of my little demonstration here, we'll say that they're 2 inches tall, and so that means then, if we go by weight, that the loaves on the table of presence, they would be about 4 times the amount of flour that each loaf would have, that we have in our bread today. So each, they're saying 7.5 pounds or so. So each, and that's for 1 loaf. And for us, we go maybe not even 2 pounds for a loaf. So these things are about 4 times the size or the density, I don't know, of what we're making today. Now, the question comes up whether or not the bread was leavened or unleavened. Now, I've read both. There's several people that I've read, and they all have a real valid argument in their mind as to whether it was leavened or unleavened. Now, if you look in the Chabad website, they kind of waffle there, and that was not meant to be a pun, Doug, that they waffle on the bread. But they equivocated a little bit. They said, well, it looks like that perhaps, we think that it's probably unleavened bread, but we really don't know. And it, could have been leavened bread, but because it was in the holy place, and leaven has connotations of sin. When we get rid of the chametz out of our house for Passover, that in that case, then they think it probably was unleavened. And then I read some other speculation from other people, and they had the arguments that, oh no, it was definitely leavened bread because of one thing or another. I don't even remember it, because the rest of this guy's site was kind of off base anyway. So I said, well, shoot, he's out there in the Pleiades someplace, and I'm not gonna reference him. But his idea was, oh yeah, it had to be leavened. And then one of the books that I've got written by David Levy, and called the Tabernacle, Shadows of the Messiah. He is of the opinion that it was definitely unleavened because of the idea of leaven and leaven is a sin. So, and I don't know. I think it could very well have been leavened bread. It certainly would have been nicer to eat it if it was leavened. Because hang with me here, and we'll go through this. Now, Ray had beat me to. He's got some notes to me here that he beat me to the punch on a couple of things here. But either way, the loaves would have been pretty large. Okay. According to the Mishnah now, these loaves were could have been about 28 inches long and about 16 inches wide and 6 inches thick, depending on how much you talk about a hand width being, how wide was a hand width. And so I think one of the ones that I was, the Mishnah, Ray's got it was about 10 hand breadths and being about 4 inches. So if that be the one something that I read, it was 7 hand breadths long and 4 hand breadths wide rather than 10 and 5. But anyway, they're talking about very, very large loaves that would, if they had them that size, they would have, they would have lapped over the ends of the table, because the Bible says to put them in 2 rows. And so, how would you rearrange all of that bread? So we just really, we really don't know. But I calculated a few things based on the size of the bread that Pat makes, the challah. If you were to take it, her dimensions of the bread, and it would be about 216 cubic inches. Okay, because it's 18 by 6 by 2 inches. Okay, and that'd be 216. Well, we determined that these cakes, or this challah had it was 4 times the amount of flour in it. So it was either going to be 4 times denser or 4 times larger, or a combination of the two. So if we said that if they used yeast and it rose just like our stuff, then theirs would have been about 864 cubic inches. And so then I calculated if they made the loaves 18 inches by 12 inches and 4 inches thick, then they would have fit on the table in 2 rows, two slabs of bread. And they could put them on there, and of course, being, even if they were like 4 inches thick or something like that, if they stacked them one on top of each other, and I think that's pretty much what the consensus is, that they were stacked on each other, 6 on a side. The stack of bread would still be 2 feet tall on this thing, and so it was pretty well weighed down. And if each loaf was 7 pounds, that's a lot of weight there to be put on that table. Now, I could rely on the ladies here who are the cooks, and I asked my wife. I said, okay, now look, if we're talking about this thing now, if they were to make this bread, let's say it was unleavened, okay. And nowhere in the Bible does it say that they would put salt in it. And if these were the dimensions, just for argument's sake, so that they would actually fit on the table, 18 by 12 by 4 inches thick, and they could have actually been, that I don't know, that was something anyway. Some dimensions. those things, okay, how would you, that would be a very, very big, heavy slab of bread. And yet then we know that they would come in, the priest would come in, and they would replace the bread every Shabbat. Okay, then the old bread was eaten by the priests in a holy place, it said, because it is holy bread, it's consecrated, it's set aside. And so they would eat that in a holy place as part of their worship and their fellowship with the Lord in the temple service that they had. Now, we got to thinking about that. The bread would sit out in the desert for a week, and no covering on it, because we'll get into the idea of the cover here shortly. But it was not covered, wasn't refrigerated. There was no Saran wrap, no preservatives. So you get to looking at it and says, wow, you know what? This, for these guys to have been able to eat the bread, it would have been either they were very tough guys, or again, this bread was kind of a living bread in that it didn't spoil, it didn't get rock hard. And so they would, they were able to eat this bread, and it was a fellowship bread. They ate the bread as part of their temple service or tabernacle service for each one, for the children of Israel, because there was 12 loaves, and that represented the 12 tribes. And so they ate the bread as kind of a fellowship meal with the Lord, and they were representing all of Israel. So yeah, it was a covenant type meal that they would eat, because and then they could also with the various types of sacrifices, there were some of the sacrifices that they could actually eat meat, and again, this was only by the priests in a holy place, and they replaced it every Shabbat. So that, to me, that's one of those things that for them to be able to eat the bread, it was, after been sitting up for a week, it would have been good, or it would have gone bad in natural circumstances. But we do know that there were some things that were just miraculous about temple service, and that was just think about when they would slaughter all the animals and all of that blood that was around, and they would just, to the disposing of all of that. It would have been, my goodness, that place would have not been a very pleasant place. It would have smelled, with the blood and the sacrifices and so forth. Any of you that have ever had, if you've dressed out a large animal, a deer or a cow or something like that, that it does not smell very nice. And so for these people to be able to do that was miraculous in itself, because God must have made provisions for this blood to just seep into the earth and not cause them problems. And so I think that he probably, with the bread also, made it to where they could eat it. So now I wanted, again, we're talking about the bread, and the reason for that is because, with the showbread, every other piece of furniture that we're talking about, it was kind of important in its own right, but the most important part of the table of showbread was not the table itself, but what it contained, and that being the bread. And so, what is the showbread? Now, the Hebrew word for showbread, well, spell check got me coming and going here. Showbread, S-H-E-W bread, or S-H-O-W bread. I've seen it written both ways, and it is lechem panim. Of course, lechem is bread, and panim is face, and so this is we would say the bread of God's face, or bread of God's presence, and so possibly a better word for the table of showbread would be a table of presence, or a table of the presence of God. So yeah, Ray has a good point that I'd read, somebody else had written that too, that the word matzah is not used for referring to the showbread. So possibly the bread was leavened, and panim is plural for faces. But when used, one of the commentaries that I had, so that's when they're talking about panim, maybe not as much as many faces, but the actual presence of the Lord. Now, also, last week we studied about the cherubim, and one of the descriptions of the cherubim had the four faces, and so that maybe there is a connection between calling this lechem panim and going back to the cherubim having the four faces. So I don't know. It's not particularly spelled out in the Bible, but anyway, it's just kind of interesting to look at that. Now, there were other accessories that they talked about: the dishes, pans, jars, and bowls. And if we go back, let's go back up to our original scripture here, and down here at verse 29, it says, "You are also to make the dishes, pans, jars, and bowls." Now, in this translation that I'm using the Tree of Life version. Okay, and I use Tree of Life version almost exclusively. It's fast becoming the standard in the Messianic circles for the scriptures. But anyway, they got it right, because they says jars and bowls to pour drink offerings from pure gold. In the King James Version, it just says to cover, for cover. And that would kind of lend one to believe that, okay, well, they made these things so that they could cover up the bread and maybe preserve it or so forth. But now this actually makes more sense, because with the bread and the wine and the oil, they would twice a day make a libation before the Lord. They would pour out the oil and the wine as an offering to the Lord, and with the bread. And they would do this at 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the morning and the evening prayers. So it would make sense that they would have these bowls and jars and this for the bread, and it would be placed on the table possibly. It really doesn't say in the Bible that you're going to put these pans and dishes on the table itself. We don't know if they actually did, but it would maybe make sense that they would do that. But certainly it would be part of the fellowship meal and the way that what they did with the offerings for that they made twice a day. So these pans and all of this stuff was made of pure gold, and they were, of course, consecrated to service in the tabernacle, service before the Lord. So that we'll get back to and there's there's some pictures of some what an artist or what a craftsman thought it might look like, and have bowls up on top for the frankincense, and they put frankincense up on top of the bread. And we know that frankincense, very costly spice. It was brought to Yeshua as a gift from the wise men from the east, and it's I have some oil that we use, when we pray for the sick at Tree of Life. I have these little things of oil, and they are scented with frankincense, and it's just a great smell. I really enjoy it. It's a very, very pleasant smell that's there. So anyway, let's continue on with that. And the Hebrew word there for the cover that you see, if you were to look in the King James Version, some of the other versions, they've got this word that means cover, but it's nasak, and that means to pour out. So these were dishes for liquids of one sort or another. And I think it's kind of interesting, that the oil, the wine was poured out at 9 o'clock and at 3 o'clock. And that when Peter was preaching at the day of Pentecost, and the Holy Spirit was poured out upon the believers that were up in the upper room, and when people were criticizing or wondering if all these people were drunk, and Peter said no. He says, because it's it's still morning time, and so we're not, they're not drunk because it's still morning. And so anyway, that was kind of interesting. I just happened to think of that. And so I think we'll go now. I did want to just comment a little bit on the bread of life. We talked about the significance of the bread, how it was made then and back in those days. You also remember that King David, when he was running from Saul, he went to the tabernacle and he ate bread from the table of the presence, he and his men, because they said they were starving. And so to me, that speaks of that these loaves must have been massive, because David and his band of merry men were able to go in there and eat some of the stuff, and it sustained them so that they could continue to run from Saul. So, but bread, we call it the staff of life, and bread, it actually can sustain life if it's made with proper bread. I wouldn't say that the stuff that we have today is real proper bread. It's been refined so much that it's refined and made for its properties of being able to be harvested well and quickly, and it holds up on the shelf and so forth. It's the bread that we have today, the flour, the wheat that we use, is so far removed from what they had back in those days. It would be interesting if we could ever get a hold of enough ancient grain to reproduce it, get it growing again, and we've got some. There are some grains out there that it's just better bread. It will sustain life better than Wonder Bread will today, or some of the stuff. Even if you go to Panera, the breads today are not as sustaining as they would have been back then. Yeshua called himself the bread of life. In John 6 and 48:51, he said, I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the desert, yet they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven so that one may eat and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I give for the life of the world. Now, and so what we see here is that the bread, or the table of the presence with the showbread on there, that is it's symbolic, or it's a foreshadowing of the Messiah. Now, the bread that the priest ate there, the showbread, all those priests died, but it was sustaining for the time. And what Yeshua is saying here is that, okay, if you eat the bread, you'll live forever. Now, of course, this bread, he says, this is my flesh, and I give, which I will give for the life of the world. And the verses right after that, the people are wondering, what in the world is this guy talking about? How can we eat flesh, eat a person? And, they just weren't, they weren't getting it. And yet, there is an ancient Hebrew idiom, or ancient Hebrew thought about eating the bread and the wine. When Yeshua, he said it several places, and he said that he said, at the Lord's Supper, he says, "This is my body. Take and eat." And so, what he's talking about there is that the idea, they had the same concept of Torah, that you would eat Torah or consume Torah. The Bible says, taste and see that the Lord is good. That concept of consuming the Torah, or consuming the living Torah, which was Yeshua, and his lifestyle and his teachings and his love and his sacrifice. You consume that, take it into yourself, and make it a part of yourself, like we would eat food, eat bread, take it into our mouth. We chew it up. We take the nourishment from it. It sustains our life. It becomes part of our flesh. And so that's what he's saying here, that we would take this divine bread that he's offering, basically his message, if we were to take that, consume it, and just make it all, make it part of us, then yes, we would have life eternal. And so that's why I think this bread of life, the concept of bread and the bread of life, and the table of showbread, it was God's fellowshipping with man. What did we have with Yeshua? He came down and he lived with man for 33 years, and he was fellowshipping with us. And there's some of us, that we celebrate the Feast of Tabernacle. So where God is tabernacling with us, and some believe that Yeshua was possibly born during the Feast of Tabernacles. Others say, well, possibly he was born in more around Pesach. But at any rate, we know that he did come and he lived among us. He lived with us, and he knew everything about, firsthand, by being a human. He said he was not tempted with anything that any other man is not tempted with, and yet he lived a sinless life. So that is why the bread that could possibly have been fallible back in the temple or in the tabernacle, and that it may not have been perfect after sitting out for a week. This living bread is that from Yeshua is incorruptible, and if we eat of this bread, take it into ourselves, make Yeshua our personal Savior, make Him part of us, then we also take on the incorruptible when we die. That we will have a life free of corruption at one point when He comes back to get us. And I think that is pretty close to what I was trying to get today, just talking about the table of showbread. And next week, I think we will continue on in